This past Friday marked the observance of the UN's International Day of Clean Energy, which is aimed to raise awareness and prompt action for a fair transition to clean energy. In a world grappling with climate change, clean energy plays a vital role in reducing emissions and can also benefit communities lacking access to reliable power sources. To help unpack this conversation in relation to South Africa's energy crisis, we are now joined by Roche, Chief Product Officer at Rubicon. A pleasure to have you on the program this afternoon. Now, given the pressing need to diversify South Africa's energy mix, especially with a heavy reliance on coal, Nick, how does Rubicon then view the significance of the UN's International Day of Clean Energy in really addressing the country's energy challenges?
Afternoon. Yeah, it's super important. It gives the country an opportunity to look at our issues. We've of course got a power availability issue, and we've also got a clean energy issue. And it's an opportunity for South Africa to look at where we're at and think about our transition and plan a way forward based on a just transition, but also certainly a way to get green energy into our energy mix in a big way.
So some experts highlight the finite nature of coal, high carbon emissions, also the economic challenges associated with sustaining coal-fired plants. In what ways does Rubicon then believe transitioning to cleaner energy, particularly solar energy, can help alleviate these challenges and also contribute to the country's economic and environmental well-being?
Yeah, there's quite a few benefits of it. Renewable energy is relatively easy to deploy, relatively inexpensive, and relatively fast. So if you have an urgent situation, you can do something quite quickly and have a positive impact. And it's also relatively inexpensive compared to some of the other legacy fuels, let's say, or fossil fuels to generate energy. So yeah, in terms of the economic benefit, there's many.
So as the country faces an energy crisis with the frequent power outages, temporary solutions like battery backup systems offer relief or some relief. How does Rubicon then envision more sustainable, call them long-term solutions to indeed address the root issue of this inadequate electricity generation and also promote energy independence?
So some of the short-term solutions actually make the problem worse. So if you just have a battery giving you some backup, what it does is it decreases or it influences what's known as your load diversity. So really what it does is it moves all the energy from being a smooth load to big lumps at the end of load shedding. So in and of itself, just a small backup system is not really going to solve the problem, although many people are doing it. Really what we have to look at is to make sure that we are actually integrating renewable energy sources, so not just storing grid power, but generating energy on a distributed nature. So rather than going for temporary measures that are just a short-term plaster, rather go for a longer-term solution, which includes energy generation at each of these, on a residential or commercial or industrial scale.
So another aspect that's often emphasized by experts is the necessity of a diversified energy mix. How does Rubicon then see the role of solar energy, especially in a country like South Africa with abundant sunlight, in really creating a robust and cost-effective grid?
Yeah, an energy mix is super important. There isn't one energy source that can solve the country's crisis. And the reality is that we've invested heavily in big new coal plants, Medupi and Kusile, for example. Those are going to be around for a long time, and they are an important part of the grid. But we have to acknowledge that they do pollute heavily, and so it's super important that we use the opportunity we've been given now as the old power plants are being retired, as they're coming to end of life, as we're desperately looking for new energy sources to take on, to transition, or to take the opportunity to transition to more sustainable energy sources like solar power. Solar power has proven itself many times over around the world in its ability to generate good alternative power. But it's not the only one. There are other really good sources of energy as well, and not one of them wins the race on its own. So, for example, wind power is also a key player, particularly at utility scale as well. There have been some really good things recently, some big, large utility scale plants coming online, and they are definitely going to make a difference to the current situation, both in terms of energy availability, but also clean energy and transitioning from these old legacy plants that are highly polluting.
Nick, there are also calls for local collaboration between stakeholders, including the government and the private sector, for this smooth transition to cleaner energy production. But how can such collaboration be achieved? And what specific steps does Rubicon propose for a fair and comprehensive shift?
Yeah, the government has to be involved. There's no doubt about it, because most of the infrastructure on which these renewable energy plants have to be attached is really ESCOM or municipal. So the government has to facilitate the infrastructure in the background, either through ESCOM or at municipal level. They have to make it available. It has to be an easy process. You know, sometimes we've seen very complicated, very onerous processes, making it very difficult and time-consuming. What we need is quick access, and we need it to be red tape free as far as possible, and to move along quickly. And I guess the main thing that the government can do is to prioritize this seriously, you know, and make themselves available for engagement, and also to open up the opportunities such as the REAP projects, which are the government's renewable energy auctions, let's call them.
Mm-hmm. So the challenges of transitioning from coal are multifaceted, including economic dependence on the coal mining industry and potential job losses in this sector. How does Rubicon then propose addressing some of these challenges, and what role can the private sector also play in mitigating the impact on affected communities?
It's an important point. You know, the coal industry is a huge industry, and there are a lot of miners involved, and all the other, you know, downstream service providers, you know, transport and all that kind of stuff. It's very important to make sure that we don't, you know, move the problem from one place to another. But the reality is that this is not going to happen overnight. So for a start, this is a transition that will take time to happen. And the coal industry, whether we like it or not, is going to be around for a long time. We export a lot of coal, so those markets will still be there. But even in terms of domestic consumption, Medupi and Kusile, just as two examples, will use enormous amounts of coal for a long time to come, as will the other plants as they get phased out. So I think it's important that we take a phased approach, that we manage it carefully. The other important, or the flip side of this coin, is that the renewable energy industry is a very good job creator, and typically, I would say on average, it's a slightly more skilled workplace, meaning that, you know, if you're on average moving from straightforward mining to renewable energy related installation or engineering, it comes as probably going to be a better paid position for your average guy, and working in a safer, cleaner environment.
But there's also been the mention of the importance of establishing transition plans which involve cooperation between the government and the private sector. Can you elaborate on specific policy frameworks or even incentives, such as maybe tax cuts, that could encourage businesses and individuals to really invest in solar energy?
Yeah, it's a very important part of what the government needs to do. To some extent, they are doing it. There are already a couple of incentives in place, and we've seen through our business customers taking those incentives. It needs to be maintained and continued and accelerated, because there's a knock-on economic benefit. So if, for example, a large user transitions at least somewhat to a renewable energy source, not only do they get the benefit of that energy source, but the grid gets relieved of their large power consumption, effectively making it available for somebody else. So those enabling measures are very important, and we would encourage government to continue with those and indeed to expand on them.
But given the cost of solar equipment, including panels, inverters, backup batteries as well, how does a company like yours then see the investment landscape for solar projects in South Africa, and what factors contribute to the attractiveness of the solar energy solutions?
The investment landscape is actually fantastic. There's several reasons. One is that renewable energy is typically cheaper than grid power now. So it means that there's demand for it. People want the green energy, but they also want let's say, the financial benefit of it. So there's good demand, and we're fortunate that we have very good banking infrastructure and investment infrastructure, which means that there's capital available, there's very smart people involved in that. Just to touch on a point that you mentioned there, the cost of equipment, it's currently the cheapest it's ever been by quite some margin. Yeah. So it's an extremely attractive time to invest at the moment, and we're seeing people taking that up between the existing incentives, the grid constraints, the need for clean power, and the current low cost. And of course, the constraints on the grid that are putting pressure on businesses. We are seeing uptake at the moment, and the banks are willing to fund, and they're definitely investing in it.
But transitioning away from coal has economic and social implications. Some we've discussed so far, but this includes job retraining and potential social unrest as well, is another factor that's been mentioned. How does Rubicon then envision addressing some of these concerns and really fostering effective communication between the government, community leaders, and workers themselves to ensure the smooth transition?
I think a lot of it is driven by emotion. You know, there's people who have vested interests, for example, in some of the legacy technology or legacy fuel sources, and it's portrayed in a certain way, and it makes people get wound up, and people think, well, I'm going to lose my job next week, and it's not the reality. The reality is it's going to take time, and the reality is that the replacement or the alternative or the new technology or the new power sources are going to be better for them in every way. They're going to be cheaper. They're going to create better jobs. It's going to be a transition. It's not going to mean that people are all going to lose their jobs tomorrow afternoon. Yeah. This is probably a 20 or 30-year project. Of course, we'd like to do as fast as we can, but we have very big coal stations like Rubicon Chief, as I mentioned, that are going to be around for many, many years to pay for themselves. And the reality is also that as part of an energy mix, they're required. So over time, I think the emotion definitely needs to be reduced and a pragmatic approach taken. And also people need to start to get to grips with what this renewable energy thing really is, not the emotive version of it, you know.
So in conclusion, Nick, can you share your company's vision for the future of South Africa's energy landscape, also considering the complexities involved in breaking free from coal, and also the importance of clean energy for the country's development and also its sustainability?
Certainly, yeah. So we're investing heavily at the moment in research and development. So we've got several R&D streams. So we're looking at how we can contribute to mitigating some of the effects of load shedding with software services and even hardware that we're developing, hardware and firmware. And we're investing heavily there. Other things that we're doing, we have quite a strong engineering backend, which is contributing to providing solutions to end users, you know, and factories, and certainly on an industrial scale, we're seeing very good uptake and good interest in that. And yeah, we will continue to do so. We can certainly see that there's demand for it, and we can see the value that we're adding in the long-term economic growth for us and for our customers.
A big thanks to our guest, Nick Roche, the Chief Product Officer at Rubicon, for really sharing valuable insights into South Africa's journey towards energy independence, also highlighting some of the factors involved in this key industry as well.